You're not what we need anymore. They fired me in public, not quietly, not in a private HR meeting with awkward smiles and a severance package folder on the table. They did it on stage, with a microphone, in front of nearly 100 employees and a few high-profile partners. It was supposed to be our annual strategy summit. I'd spent weeks prepping my section of the presentation, outlining the growth trajectory, anticipated client expansions, and the digital overhaul I'd personally led over the past 2 years. I wasn't nervous. I was proud. I'd built this, not alone sure, but my fingerprints were on every campaign that had saved Roth and Lanning during the 2020 downturn. I'd turned down other job offers, pushed through late nights, said no to weekends, said yes to last-minute red-eye flights and 7 a.m. board meetings. All because Grant, our CEO, once looked me in the eye and said, "You're the future of this firm." So when I wrapped up my segment and looked out at the crowd, I was expecting maybe polite applause, or at the very least a nod from the senior execs. What I got instead was silence. And then Grant stood up. He took the mic from the side podium, smiled, and said, "That was interesting. But as of today, we're shifting directions." I blinked. Was that part of the script? He continued. "Sloan will no longer be leading our strategic vision. We're excited to announce a new chapter, one more aligned with where Roth and Lanning is going." It took me a few seconds to register what he'd said. Then I heard the gasps, felt the stillness, saw the confusion and relief in the eyes of a few team members. That's when Emily walked out, new black blazer, slick ponytail, holding the clicker like she owned the room. Emily, who 2 years ago was an intern I had personally mentored, who once asked if she could borrow parts of my pitch deck for a mock proposal, who never led a major campaign of her own but always found ways to align herself with mine. She walked past me with a smile so bright it burned. Grant gestured to her like a proud father at a graduation. "Please welcome our new Director of Strategic Initiatives." I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. But I could feel the burn of 100 eyes on me as I collected my notes and stepped off stage. No one tried to stop me. No one even looked up. Even Mia, my closest friend at the firm, someone who used to vent to me on Friday nights over wine, just stared straight ahead. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She didn't defend me. I left the ballroom like a ghost. No one followed. By the time I reached the front desk, my security badge was already deactivated. I had to ask a temp assistant to unlock the office so I could grab my coat. That night, Roth and Lanning posted a 45-second recap video of the event. Grant on stage, Emily shaking hands. The caption read, "Roth and Lanning steps boldly into the future. A new era of leadership begins." My face, not even a frame. My voice completely erased. I didn't exist. It's funny how fast people rewrite the story when it suits them. I went from backbone of the department to not aligned with the vision in a single breath. And somehow no one questioned it. No one asked why. But here's the part they didn't understand. I wasn't let go because I wasn't good enough. I was let go because I knew too much. Because I'd seen how decisions were made behind closed doors. Because I'd asked questions I wasn't supposed to ask. About bonuses that magically disappeared, about Emily's mysterious rise, about a certain client proposal that came with a side deal no one was supposed to mention. They thought by cutting me off, by humiliating me, they could protect themselves. They thought I'd disappear quietly, maybe take a lesser job somewhere, maybe post some on to new adventures update on LinkedIn and move on. They didn't realize they'd just made the biggest mistake of their careers. Because now, for the first time in nearly a decade, I had nothing tying me to Roth and Lanning. No NDAs, no loyalty, no illusions. They erased me to feel safe. But all they did was set me free, and I knew exactly where to start. I wasn't supposed to last long at Roth and Lanning. At least that's what Grant told me in my first interview. "You're impressive," he said, flipping through my resume with one eyebrow raised. "But this place, it breaks most people within 6 months." I smiled and replied, "Then I guess I'll give it 7. I stayed for 8 years. 8 years of skipping holidays, fixing other people's pitches at midnight, and stepping in whenever a team fell apart under pressure." I was the one who closed the Dawson Tech account when our head of client relations panicked and left mid-campaign. I was the one who saved Grant from a public meltdown when a keynote speaker canceled 30 minutes before an investor panel. I didn't just solve problems, I absorbed them. And at first, I didn't mind. I was young, hungry, determined to prove that I could keep up, even outrun the men who dominated the upper levels of the agency. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I stayed late enough, someone would notice. That he would notice, and he did, sort of. Grant called me reliable, sharp, a quiet force. He'd loop me in on private calls, ask for my advice. Before big meetings, let me speak to press off the record. But never publicly. Never in a way that gave me credit. Always in shadows, always behind closed doors. When Emily joined as a junior strategist, I saw so much of myself in her, at least at first. She was eager, bright, and just rough enough around the edges to seem harmless. She'd stay after meetings to ask questions. She'd compliment my slides. She'd ask for my notes just to study structure. I didn't think twice. I helped her. I shared my frameworks. I even rehearsed with her before her first client pitch. But somewhere along the way, I started noticing things. Phrases I'd used in meetings showing up in her decks. My exact formatting appearing in her original presentations. Ideas I floated to Grant being reimagined by Emily just days later. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Then one day, a client forwarded me a proposal draft Emily had sent them. It wasn't just similar to mine, it was mine. Word for word. I brought it to Grant, showed him the file timestamps, the originals. He looked at me, shrugged, and said, "It's a competitive environment. If you want recognition, you've got to fight harder for it." I didn't respond. But that was the first time something cracked inside me. After that, Emily's rise was fast, too fast. She started getting lead roles on new projects, got invited to the same networking events I'd once been the only woman in. Eventually, she started skipping past me, entirely speaking directly to Grant, like they'd been working together for years. I tried to tell myself it was just how things worked, that maybe she had something I didn't, but deep down I knew better. It wasn't just about talent, it was about timing, positioning, favor, and maybe something else. 6 months before I was let go, I caught wind of a proposed partnership Grant was quietly pushing with a consulting firm that had a reputation for dirty lobbying. The contract was buried inside a subfolder I wasn't supposed to see. But I was still listed on the shared drive. It didn't sit right with me, not the terms, not the names attached, not the fact that it completely contradicted the ethical statement we had just published publicly the month before. I brought it up in a leadership meeting, carefully, tactfully. I said, if this goes through, we need to be sure it doesn't conflict with our values, or our investors will notice. The room went silent. Grant gave me a look I'd never seen before, cold, calculating. After the meeting, he pulled me aside and said, "You're making waves that don't need to be made." That was the moment I knew. I wasn't being positioned to lead the next chapter. I was being positioned to take the fall if things went sideways. The sudden changes made more sense after that. My responsibilities started shifting without explanation. My name disappeared from certain pitch decks. I was excluded from last-minute strategy calls I used to run. My access to financial dashboards was revoked without warning. It was a slow ghosting, one that made it hard to point fingers because technically I still had my title. Technically I still had my office. Technically nothing had changed, but inside I was already being erased. And the final blow was the summit. Public, sharp, efficient, just like a clean surgical cut. They thought they'd buried me, but what they didn't know was I'd already started digging. Not a grave, an escape, a new blueprint. And this time I wasn't sharing it with anyone. I didn't post about it. No dramatic farewell. No vague status about new chapters or exciting adventures ahead. I didn't update my job title, didn't tell anyone where I was going, because truthfully I had no idea. For the first time in 8 years, I had nothing scheduled. No back-to-back meetings, no 11 p.m. emails, no Sunday night deck revisions. Just silence. It was deafening. At first, I tried to treat it like a vacation. I slept in, took long walks, watched people in cafes who didn't seem like they were constantly calculating ROI in their heads. But beneath that stillness was a constant thrum like a phone, vibrating in a locked drawer. Anger, not just at them, at myself, for staying too long, for trusting too much, for not seeing the signs until it was already too late. Some nights I'd replay that summit over and over in my mind. The way Grant had smiled while cutting me down. The way Emily had walked past me like she'd won something she actually earned. The silence of the room, that hurt the most. But something shifted in week 3. A random email showed up in my inbox subject line. You probably don't remember me. It was from a guy named Leo, the founder of a tech startup I'd once helped for free. 2 years ago, he'd cold emailed Roth and Lanning asking for marketing guidance. We had passed on his project, but I'd taken an hour to meet with him anyway. I'd liked his product. It wasn't perfect, but it was smart, scrappy, and had heart. Now he wrote, I heard what happened. If you're consulting or even thinking about something new, I'd love to pick your brain. I almost deleted it, but something about the timing, it felt right. I replied. The next week we met in a tiny co-working space just outside San Diego. No fancy conference rooms, no assistants, just him, a co-founder, and a whiteboard. They told me Canava, their company, was still alive, but barely. They had a solid user base, but they were bleeding its spend and had no brand clarity. Their last pitch to investors flopped. They were 3 months from running out of money. I asked questions, listened, took notes. Then I asked to see their data real numbers, not the polished decks, the raw stuff. And what I saw was potential. They had a real product, a community, a need. What they didn't have was positioning. And that, ironically, was something Roth and Lanning used to pay me 6 figures to create. I asked for 2 days. I went back to my Airbnb and built a framework overnight. New market entry angle, fresh messaging pillars, a cost-efficient acquisition strategy that didn't rely on throwing money at influencers. When I showed it to them, Leo just stared at me for a long time and said, "Why are you not running your own agency?" I smiled. Because I was too busy building someone else's. We talked numbers. They couldn't afford me full-time, but I didn't want a paycheck. I wanted skin in the game. So I offered this. I'd rebuild their entire brand and relaunch their next campaign if I got 30% equity, decision-making power, and full creative control. They hesitated, and then they said yes. That night, for the first time in a month, I didn't fall asleep out of exhaustion or frustration. I slept with a mind that felt electric again, not because I had a title, but because for the first time, everything I built would be mine. Over the next few weeks, I became something between a CMO and a ghost. I rebuilt their customer journey, repositioned the platform, and turned their metrics upside down in the best way. I reached out to old contacts, not as Sloan from Roth and Lanning, but as a new entity entirely. Most were curious, some were skeptical, but a few took the meeting, and that was all I needed. And then one day, while researching potential investor overlap, I stumbled on a familiar name, Roth and Lanning. Turns out they had tried to acquire Canava the year before, offering pennies with an insulting clause about full creative control. Leo had declined. When I asked why, he said, "The woman I spoke to from their team gave me the worst pitch I've ever seen. Cold, cookie cutter, like she didn't even care." I asked what her name was. He frowned, trying to remember. Erica, no. Emily, that was it. I didn't react. I didn't smile. But inside, something lit up. They didn't just try to erase me. They tried to buy the very thing I would one day rebuild. And now that thing was mine. They didn't know I was back. Not yet. But soon they would. Not because I'd announce it, but because I'd take what they wanted most. And I'd do it better than they ever could. Quietly, effortlessly, and with absolute precision. If you've spent long enough inside a system, you start to see its patterns even after you've walked away. Especially after you've walked away. 3 months into Canava's rebrand, things started moving fast. Our campaign metrics were climbing, the customer base was growing steadily, and suddenly, people who once left my emails unread were forwarding my name to decision makers. I wasn't using Roth and Lanning's tactics. I was using mine, the ones I'd honed over years, but was never allowed to claim. Then one morning, Leo forwarded me an RFP. Big name healthcare platform, 7-figure campaign, nationwide reach. It was one of those kingmaker projects. Whoever won it would land not just revenue, but visibility, credibility. Kinova wasn't supposed to be ready for something that big. We didn't have the headcount, didn't have the agency pedigree, didn't have the time, but we did have one thing that others didn't: me. And I recognized the layout of the RFP immediately, because I'd written it before. Not this one, of course, but the format, the priorities, the language. It was classic Roth and Lanning. A template they reused when they wanted to control the pitch environment. I knew exactly how they'd approach it. I turned to Leo and said, "They're bidding on this too, aren't they?" He blinked. "How did you?" I smiled. Because I taught them how. For the next 10 days, I barely slept. We didn't have the budget for glossy production or over-the-top visuals. But that wasn't what this client wanted. They wanted vision with teeth, someone who could not only think, but execute. So I built a pitch rooted in data user journey logic and grounded brand positioning. But I didn't stop there. I layered in psychological touchpoints, the exact kind of client-side fears I knew Roth would gloss over. Because I'd been in those meetings, I'd seen how they treated technical clients like fashion brands. This campaign needed precision. We gave them that. We sent it in 12 hours before the deadline. No fanfare, no hype, just strategy. Then we waited. While the team focused on other deliverables, I took long walks around the city. AirPods in, podcasts on. But my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't nervous about the pitch. I was remembering. Remembering how many times I'd pitched for Roth and Lanning, only to have my work handed off at the last minute to someone more presentable. Usually a man. Lately, a younger woman with a tighter dress code and looser ethics. I thought about Emily and Grant and how confident they must feel submitting a bid with their firm's name at the top. How they likely didn't even know Kinova existed. That made me smile. When the results came in, Leo called me. He didn't even say hello, just, "We got it." I didn't respond for a second, just closed my eyes, not out of disbelief, out of satisfaction. They'd chosen Kinova over Roth and Lanning, over a legacy firm with awards. Decades of experience and a flashier office. They didn't know me, but they knew our work, and that was enough. Later that week, I heard through a former vendor that Roth had been blindsided. Apparently, Grant had already told the board they were a lock for the deal. They'd even started staffing early. Emily had gone on a podcast days before the decision and hinted at a game-changing healthcare partnership. But the call never came. Instead, the press release went out with Kinova's name on it. My name wasn't mentioned, but my fingerprints were all over it. And still, I said nothing. No post, no gloating, no anonymous leaks. Let them wonder. Let them squirm. I didn't need credit. I needed leverage. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up the files I'd been quietly compiling. Over the past 2 weeks, I'd been in touch with 3 different early investors of Kinova. Nice people, smart but tired. They'd held on to their equity longer than expected, and they were willing to part with it for the right price. Not a buyout, not a hostile move, just a quiet transfer. Through a small consulting firm I'd set up under a generic name. Nothing illegal, nothing even suspicious, just smart. By the end of the month, I would own 35% of Kinova. Not on paper under my name, not yet, but real and irreversible. Leo didn't know, not because I was deceiving him, because I wasn't ready for him or anyone to know what I was building. Not yet. That same week, I got a message on LinkedIn. No profile picture, no message body, just a connection request. The username was a string of numbers, but I recognized the email domain. Roth and Lanning, they were watching. And for the first time, I was fine with that, because they didn't know what I was really doing. They didn't know they'd just lost me. And more importantly, they had no idea I was just getting started. Power doesn't shift in one dramatic blow. It tilts subtly, quietly, until the ground beneath your feet doesn't feel stable anymore. And by the time you notice, it's already too late. That's exactly what was starting to happen at Roth and Lanning. And they had no idea. The healthcare contract had been a fluke in their eyes. They brushed it off, called it an off-cycle loss, in internal meetings blamed the client for unclear expectations. I knew the language. I'd written it into status reports myself, back when I was still inside the machine. But underneath the PR-friendly spin, there was fear, because something had shifted. A company no one had heard of, a startup with no awards, no high-profile clients, no Madison Avenue office had beaten them. And worse, they didn't know why. I did. At Canava, we didn't celebrate like we'd won the Super Bowl. We got to work. The new campaign needed execution, not applause. But what that win gave us was something harder to measure momentum. Suddenly, other mid-sized clients started reaching out. Ones who'd been burned by legacy agencies, ones looking for faster turnarounds, more attention, less arrogance. We weren't swamped, not yet. But the inbox no longer sat empty over the weekend. And every time we submitted a pitch, we felt stronger, sharper, like we belonged. Leo was thrilled. He kept saying things like, "We're really doing this," as if surprised it wasn't falling apart. I smiled, nodded, but inside I wasn't surprised. I had built a machine like this before. The only difference now, this one had my name on it, even if no one saw it yet. Meanwhile, Roth was beginning to show hairline fractures. I had a friend, well, more of an ex-coworker who still worked there. She didn't know I was involved with Canava, but she liked to vent. Apparently, 3 major clients had downsized budgets, 2 directors had quietly left, and there was a rumor that Grant had been advised by the board to restructure the creative team. Translation heads were rolling. Emily, she said, had taken over several projects, but was missing deadlines. Honestly, my contact whispered, "I think she's drowning." I didn't say much, just listened, and filed it all away. At Canava, we kept building, won 2 more regional accounts, 1 small nonprofit campaign, 1 early-stage SaaS rebrand. Not huge deals, but respectable, enough to show consistency, enough to start turning heads. I started noticing something new. Agencies I'd never heard of were suddenly mimicking our style. Phrases from our decks began showing up in other people's proposals. I'd been copied before, but this time I smiled, because if they were copying us, it meant they were watching. And if they were watching, eventually they'd start asking, "Who's behind this?" Not yet, but soon. Quietly, I continued building control. I didn't rush to appear on leadership pages or make investor announcements. That wasn't the game I was playing. I bought a few more small stakes in Canava. Nothing flashy, just enough to move me past the 45% line, still not a majority, but close enough to keep board decisions in check. Leo was still CEO on paper, but I signed off on every major move. He didn't mind, he trusted me. And to his credit, he kept the team motivated while I worked behind the curtain. One afternoon, a former Roth client reached out. Someone I'd worked with years ago. He asked if I was available for informal consultation for a rebrand. I said yes, under my own name, not Canava's. We met for coffee. Halfway through the conversation, he leaned in and said, "I've heard Roth is scrambling. Emily's been sending decks that feel rushed, hollow." I didn't respond, didn't need to. Then he added, "But this new company, Canava, they've been making noise, fresh voice, sharp campaigns. You heard of them?" I sipped my coffee. "A little," I said. "They're doing good work." He nodded. "I think I'll give them a shot." That night, I stood in front of my apartment window, looking out over the skyline. It was late. The city had quieted, and I thought to myself, this is how power returns. Not by storming the gates, but by slowly turning the tide until the castle starts crumbling from within. I hadn't stepped foot inside Roth since the day they fired me. I hadn't said a word to Grant, hadn't sent Emily a single signal. But I knew they were starting to hear my name. Whispers in hallways, questions in pitch meetings, maybe even a few awkward glances at internal reviews. They didn't know I was behind it, yet, but soon they'd realize that the silence they once dismissed was the one thing coming for everything they built. The email came late on a Tuesday, sent from a partner at Roth & Lanning, short, polished, desperate in all the ways professionals try to hide. They were interested in exploring potential synergies between our firms. They admired Canava's agility in emerging markets. They welcomed a conversation around collaboration and possible acquisition structures. In other words, they were sinking. and they thought we were their lifeboat. It had been nearly a year since they fired me on stage, since they stripped me of my title and handed it to someone who plagiarized my work. A year since they edited me out of the very company I helped save. And now they were knocking politely, of course, hoping I'd be too ambitious or too flattered to say no, hoping I wouldn't ask the real question. Why now? Leo called me right after he saw the message. He sounded almost excited. They want to talk. With us. Can you believe that I could? Because I'd seen the signs before he did. I just hadn't told him how many. They're struggling, I said. He hesitated. You think we should take the meeting? I paused. Yes, but not just any meeting. I wanted them in the room, the real ones. Grant, Emily, no assistants, no junior partners. If Roth and Lanning was finally ready to negotiate, they'd do it face to face with a person they thought they erased. We scheduled the meeting for the following week. A neutral location, a downtown conference suite in New York. Nothing flashy, nothing public. Leo would open. I would arrive later at exactly the right moment. Until then, I said nothing. Didn't hint, didn't warn. Let them walk in blind. The morning of the meeting, I dressed simply. Dark blazer, clean lines. Nothing too memorable until I spoke. I didn't need armor. I had position. When I entered the building, the receptionist handed me a key card without asking. I took the elevator to the 28th floor, paused just outside the conference room. Inside, I could hear voices, Grant's, Emily's, Leo's. I waited. Let them settle, let them start. Then I walked in. The moment was quiet, but electric. Grant's voice trailed off mid-sentence. Emily blinked like her brain was still catching up to what her eyes were seeing. Leo smiled because he finally understood. I didn't sit right away. I took my time, placed a folder on the table. Emily stood up. Sloan, I didn't realize you were involved with Canava. I tilted my head. No one ever really realizes, do they? Grant cleared his throat. Well, this is unexpected. I looked at him, not from where I'm standing. They tried to regain control, offered numbers, percentages, partnership potential. They suggested keeping Canava independent in brand, but folded into Roth's infrastructure. Emily smiled like she was doing me a favor. Grant spoke like he still held the cards. I let them finish. Then I opened my folder, inside a full breakdown of Canava's growth over the past year, current projections, press coverage, and a letter of intent written not by them, but by me. I slid it across the table. Let's be clear, I said. You're not acquiring us. You're being absorbed. The room went cold. Grant didn't blink. Emily looked like she was choking on air. I continued. If you want your employees to have a future, you'll accept these terms. Your brand dissolves. Your leadership steps down. Key talent will be offered positions selectively. Emily tried to interrupt. You can't be serious, I held up a hand. I'm not here to relive anything. I'm here to close. Grant finally spoke. Low, bitter. You planned this. I met his gaze. No, you did. The day you pushed me out. I stood, gathered my folder, and just before leaving, I added calmly, you built a company that erased people. I built one that remembers. Then I walked out. No anger, no satisfaction on my face, just clarity. Later that night, Leo texted me. They signed every line, no edits, no negotiation. The news didn't make headlines. There was no dramatic press release. Roth and Lanning disappeared the same way they had dismissed me quietly, efficiently. And me, I didn't post about it, didn't send any emails, didn't call anyone. I just opened my laptop and got back to work. People always ask if I confronted them again. If I ever stood in front of Grant and Emily and listed out every deal they stole, every time they dismissed me. Every late night, I worked just to be passed over. They ask if I made them read the numbers, if I showed them the press coverage, if I sent them screenshots of their clients tagging my company, if I walked into a room full of their old employees just to watch them squirm. The answer is no, because here's what no one tells you about revenge. The moment you center it around someone else, you hand them power again. I didn't rebuild for them. I didn't rebuild to prove a point. I rebuilt because I refused to let them write the ending. They wanted me to vanish. And for a while I did. But while they celebrated their fresh start, I created something real, something resilient. Something that couldn't be edited out of a LinkedIn video. After the acquisition, things moved quickly. We absorbed key talent, phased out the rest, quietly dissolved Roth and Lanning's brand from every corner of the market. It didn't make headlines. We didn't need it to. There's something deeply satisfying about silence about power that doesn't raise its voice, about legacy that doesn't ask for applause. Grant, last I heard, he took an advisory role at some crypto-adjacent consultancy. Emily deleted most of her public profiles. Rumor is she moved to a different city, teaching yoga now or something close to it. I didn't follow up. I didn't care, because by then I had already moved on. I moved Canava's HQ to a quiet office near the water. We kept things lean, smart, no flashy campaigns, no egos, no slides full of jargon. We became known for clean strategy, for solving real problems, and for protecting our people. I built the kind of company I used to wish existed, the kind I thought I had found at Roth until they proved me wrong. Funny how life works. Sometimes you don't get the apology, you don't get closure, you just get better. I kept my name off the masthead. Didn't need to be front-facing, didn't need to be thanked, but every once in a while someone would figure it out. A former client, an ex-employee, someone from the old world who connected the dots. They'd send a message. "Is it really you behind this? I always wondered what happened to you." I'd reply, "Nothing happened to me. I just stopped waiting to be chosen." There's a photo I keep in my office. It's not framed, not even visible to others. It's a still image from that day at the summit, me standing at the edge of the stage right after Grant announced my removal. I look small, out of place, forgotten. I keep it not as a reminder of pain, but of distance, of how far I've come. That version of me, the one gripping her folder, pretending she wasn't humiliated, she didn't disappear. She evolved, and in doing so, she became someone they couldn't ignore, couldn't silence, couldn't replace. Sometimes I still get questions. People ask why I never told my side of the story, why I never exposed them, why I didn't make noise when I had the chance. And the truth is because I didn't need to. I wasn't interested in revenge that made headlines. I wanted something better. I wanted control. I wanted peace. And I have it now. I didn't burn bridges. I built my own island. And then I stopped looking back. That's the thing about power, real power. It's quiet. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't seek validation. It simply moves. And if you're not paying attention, you don't realize it's already behind you. Already signed the deal. Already closed the door.